It's filled with uncertainties, and therefore it makes a difference who's on the Supreme Court to interpret it. The notion that it's kind of self-interpreting is simply nonsense. Some of the things that some of the senators said in the Senate Judiciary Committee hearings on Sotomayor were so dumb that I would have given them an F in my course if they had written that as a term paper. Okay, let's look at Sonia Sotomayor. You obviously know something about her. The 111th Justice. She's now sworn in and she's now sitting on the court. The court officially begins its term on the first Monday in October, which is a week from Monday, but actually they've already heard a case last week, which is very unusual, and I can't predict how she might vote. Do you know what that case is? That's the case of the movie, the anti-Hillary Clinton movie that was put out during the campaign by the same folks who gave us Swift Boat in 2004, called Hillary the Movie. And it's a very adversarial and nasty attack on Hillary Clinton. But the Democrats protested, or the Clinton campaign protested, and the Federal Elections Commission held that it violated federal elections law. And so that case was the case heard by the Supreme Court, and when it came up in the spring, the justices really didn't know what to do with it, and so they postponed it and had a rehearing. So it was reheard again last week. It could be a really major First Amendment case, because if the justices vote like I think they're going to vote, which is to uphold, to overturn the law, the federal elections law, on the grounds that it violates the First Amendment, it will have to overrule two prior precedents, two decisions of recent years. So it could be quite a blockbuster opinion. I don't know when it will come down, but sometime perhaps in the late fall or whatever. And Justice Sotomayor will, of course, be part of the decision-making court when that comes down. So she's the 111th Justice. She's the third woman justice in history. There are now 2 women on the court, and of course she is the first Hispanic or Latina justice on the court. I would note that George Bush was clearly intending to appoint a Hispanic judge to the court. His name was Miguel Estrada, but he was sidelined by the Democrats, who threatened to filibuster, not because of his ethnicity, but because he was extremely conservative, which I think he was. He was also very good, very smart. But that didn't happen, so Sotomayor becomes the first Latin on the court. And ironically, if Bush had succeeded with Estrada, we might not have Sotomayor, because I think that was certainly one of the reasons that President Obama had in mind when he chose her. She has a very distinguished career, starting in a working-class immigrant family in New York, worked her way through Princeton and Yale Law School, worked for Robert Morgenthau, the very famous district attorney of New York, where she was his chief prosecutor, and he thinks very highly of her. And then for the last 16 years, she was a judge on the Court of Appeals. As you know, the federal courts in the United States are divided into district or trial courts, 1 or more in every state, and then 12 regional courts of appeals. And she sat on the Second Circuit, which is New York, Vermont, and Connecticut. As you might expect, when the hearings began, every decision she ever made, and there were hundreds and hundreds of them, of course, was mined for what it would show. And in the end, they didn't show very much, because courts of appeals judges don't have the same freedom as Supreme Court justices to make the law, to interpret the law, to change the law. They basically have to follow the law. And so what it showed was that when she had to follow the law, she did. Now, I understand from Rob Coolish that you talked about the Ritchie case. Is it Ritchie or Ricci?
Ricci case.
How's it pronounced? Ricci. The New Haven firefighters case. And she was one of the two justices who voted in favor of New Haven and for throwing out the results of the test for firefighters on the grounds that it was a disparate impact kind of case. Well, the answer is she was right in terms of following what the Supreme Court had said. She wasn't breaking new ground. She wasn't a judicial activist. She was just doing what a Court of Appeals judge should do. The fact is that when this case then came to the Supreme Court changed the law. And so it made it seem as if she was somehow in a different mode or operating in a different direction, but she wasn't. She was just doing what she was supposed to do. Nonetheless, in the hearings, it came out that she was perhaps not as wedded to precedents as she might have been, but that's simply not true. But what's true and what's false doesn't make any difference in these hearings. It's what people want to believe. And so that turned out to be important. It didn't defeat her, but it required some explanation. As you know, she has replaced Justice David Souter. There can't be two more different people in the entire world than Sonia Sotomayor and David Souter, who has retired to his log cabin in New Hampshire. Actually, he's building a new house. He decided the log cabin was too small. A very, very, very bright man, turned out to be a much more liberal justice than anybody expected, and hates Washington and probably will never come back. Sotomayor, on the other hand, is much more gregarious, and it will be interesting to see how she functions on the court. She's in her middle 50s, which is about the average age that Supreme Court justices have been appointed in the recent past, and barring illness, so she's a diabetic, but it's under control, she might be expected to serve 25 years. That's been what other justices have served, and that would make her 80 and put her on the court about as long as Clarence Thomas intends to stay on the court. He said he will never leave the court voluntarily, so your guess is as good as mine as to when that will happen. How long do justices serve? Well, the modern justices have been averaging 25 years. That's a long time. When the Constitution framers wrote Article 3, and they inserted the clause that you're familiar with called the Good Behavior Clause, that the justices would serve during good behavior, we call it life tenure. They had no conception of people living that long. Now, true that John Marshall confounded them. He lived a long time and was Chief Justice for 34 years. But most people in those days, the life expectancy was 40 or 45. And so to say that a justice would serve during good behavior, basically, and there are no term limits in the Constitution for justices, didn't mean 25 years and retiring at 80. I don't know whether it's a matter of cause and effect, but a recent study by the American Insurance Institute revealed that the 3 longest lived in America are Mormons, Seventh-day Adventists, and Supreme Court justices. So it may be that once you get there, you just hang on, you just live a long time, and you survive a lot of cancers that other people don't survive, and it just goes on. Now, let me say something about the process which got her there. Obviously, when there's a vacancy, the president pretty much determines who he or wants to appoint. Legally speaking, constitutionally speaking, the same process is used for all federal judges, but in fact, they're very different. Supreme Court appointments have become high politics. We assume that there is a kind of stage that's going to be lit up. Why? Well, and this, I'd say, this what I call the new politics of Supreme Court appointments.